The Downtown Community Task Force meeting of April 20th, 2023. Leslie, please call roll.
Thank you. Member Thompson.
Here.
Member Ondrasek.
Here.
Member Mayer. He did email indicating that he would not be able to attend today. Member Von Hune.
Here.
Member Vargas Smith.
Here.
Member Reed. He also sent an email stating he would not be able to attend today. Member Coyne.
Here.
Member Tai.
Here.
And Member Varjane. She also stated that she would not be able to attend today.
All right, thank you, Leslie. Is there a motion to excuse or not excuse Member Varshney, Member Reed, and Member Mayer from this evening's meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. All right, they are excused. Leslie, please read the DCTF meeting procedures into the record.
Thank you. Meetings are conducted by the chair in accordance with the following procedures. The chair of the DCTF directs all activity during the meeting. Any item on this agenda may be continued to a subsequent meeting. Special procedures, time limits may be applied to any items as prescribed by the chair. Copies of the current agenda and staff reports for each of the items on the agenda are available online on the Downtown Precise Plan website, as well as on the City Clerk's website. And for those of you in person, they are located at the table by the entry door. Chair?
Thank you, Leslie. We'll now move on to the consent calendar.
Thank you, Chair. We have no items this evening.
All right, moving on to general business. Leslie?
Item 1, we have for you an update on lease agreements for the city-owned property within downtown. And we have Assistant City Manager Manuel Pineda here to give you that update.
Good evening. I just traveled from another meeting to here, so I'm still catching my breath a little bit, but I made it. So this is just a brief discussion. I don't have any slides or a presentation for you. Just want to let you know, so as a reminder, you probably, actually, all of you don't know this, so we went to council a couple of years ago and asked for extension of the leases for authority for Commerce Plaza and Peddlers Plaza. And of course, Commerce Plaza is the big building, you know, and then Peddlers Plaza is the small strip mall that we have next to it. So the Peddlers Plaza's leases expires on September 30th of this year. And Commerce Plaza expires on May 31st of next year. So Commerce is still a little bit far away. I wanted to make you aware, because we've been coordinating, you know, and keeping you updated, that right now I think, I'll ask Leslie, but we're looking at having the IR out on May. And then there's a time frame after that, right, to go to council. And once we do go to council, if you remember, we discussed what the time frame would be to go to the Surplus Land Act. And then, if depending on how that goes, there's a process to go through an RFP, RFQ to select a vendor if there's no offer. So there's a process for that. So based on that time frame, I am going to go back to council and request extensions on the Peddlers lease at this point. I hadn't really thought how long that would be. I initially thought maybe 6 months. Might make sense to align it with the Commerce Plaza leases for now, pushing us out to May 31st, 2024, and then see where we're at in the process, you know, 6 months from that May period to see what we want to do with Commerce Plaza and Peddlers Plaza at that point. So I'm still working through the details. There's a couple of things. One is that there is revenue that's coming in from those buildings that I need to be able to do all the maintenance that's happening out there. And two, as you can imagine, having empty buildings and empty storefronts is not good for anybody, and it definitely becomes a maintenance issue for us. So my goal is to try to align the leases and keeping the activity there until such a time where we know we're going forward with something different. So I didn't want to catch anyone by surprise, but that will be. So from my perspective, I'll take something in the next month or so to council on Peddlers and ask for that authority to extend. Our property manager, we already have in place, so we don't have to worry about that. And initially, I was thinking maybe a 6-month extension, but you know, might make more sense to just align it with Commerce, and that way we're dealing with the exact same time frame for both properties. So that's it. That's my item on this.
Go ahead, Butch.
Just have one question, Manuel. Have the tenants expressed interest in continuing those leases on the short term?
Yeah, so
Out
when
of
we did the 2-year leases, and Peddlers is obviously a much smaller, right? And a lot of the tenants have been there a long time. So they have always been interested in staying as long as they can. Commerce is a little bit different, right? Because we have about 40 or so leases there, and they're not uniform, right? They all think a little differently. And since we're still a little ways away on that one, not till May of next year, having had that conversation, but they are extended till May of next year at this point.
I just needed to know, so if I have to change my lunch plans, it's right across the street from me.
So no, none of them have expressed any interest in not staying for as long as they can.
I would assume that there would be a benefit for a longer lease, and with some of the, individual private owners for Peddlers Plaza, the unknown of every 6 months to hold your business and your family and everything, it could be a challenge. So, I mean, have you talked to the property manager to understand, where that is? And is there a benefit, and would you come to council with a potential, maybe it is 6 months to align? I think that's a really good idea, but I'm actually thinking, just based on the timeline and realistically, it's not going to happen for probably another year and a half. So to bump them both and give them the stability so that they don't empty out and become vacant storefronts, and Butch doesn't have to find another place for lunch because he might wander closer to my side.
Yeah, so I haven't worked through all the details yet. With this one's expiring in September 30th, I want to start that conversation with them early enough. And Commerce expiring on May 31st. I think from my end, just for my simplicity, I probably want to try to align those. So that would be probably a good first extension for me, saying we're going to extend all your leases to May 31st if they're interested. And I think Peddlers is a little different just because, like I said, a lot of those tenants have been there a long time. And for that type of investment, for those type of uses, people usually want longer leases anyway, so we're having more difficulty getting new tenants to those empty spaces than Commerce, right? Where you can just step into a building and an office, 700 square foot office, and just take it for the period of time. So from an alignment perspective, I'm likely, instead of the 6 months, I'm likely leaning to just say May 31st, 2004, but I will have the conversation with our property manager to see if that creates any issues. But what they have told us up to this point when we're doing the last renewal is they've been there a long time and they want to stay as long as they can.
Yeah, I just hope they understand that, it would be from a alignment perspective, and that the likelihood is that they're going to be able to stay longer. Because again, the thought is we don't want them to empty out in the interim.
And then, Mr. Chair, of course, I'm also trying to be respectful, right? Because there's been concern in the past about how long the leases get extended. So I know that so I'm trying to find that balance, but certainly I think between now, once we go to council, right, with a plan, I think we'll have a much better time frame, right? Especially as we start the Surplus Land Act, and I'll know how long those extensions should be, because it's likely we might need some more time. And like I said, there's two things here for me. One is there is revenue, and whether there's tenants or not, I have expenditures out there, so I need to have revenue coming in to cover those expenditures. Especially, we found out a lot with the rains that came in. That was quite a surprise on those buildings with things we had to deal with. And two, I've dealt with empty buildings and empty storefronts before, and it's just a nightmare to maintain and operate. Actually, the expenditures increase much, much more because now you're having to add security and a few other things to it. So I want to time it as close as possible so we don't have empty buildings for any period of time if we can, if it's feasible.
All right, I know this is not specific to the leases, but it is the city-owned property within the downtown, and you might not have an answer, but the courthouse closed on Monday, which they do have an encumbered 1.14 acres of parking lot. Their rear parking lot is actually city-owned land. So have you heard anything officially from the county, or? Sorry to spring it on you.
No.
I'm sure everybody would be very interested to know.
I know that's one of the items on my list to follow up and check to see kind of if they have plans or any plans. I do know that there's other courthouses, right, that the judicial, it's not the state that actually owns, but the state, I forget the exact words. Sometimes they do hold those properties for a period of time, but we lost our feed, by the way. Just letting you know. So for whoever's watching from home, thank you. But we are planning to have that check and with the same context we had when we spoke. See, if there might be different people there, but we're planning to check to see if they have any long-term plans or any near-term plans, actually, to see what's going on.
So to follow up on that, so are you planning to, what we understand is Sunnyvale's also debating closing the courthouse. And this is a good opportunity now for the, to figure out with Rebecca or whoever, what they're doing. Do you have a set time with her or with the courts?
No, I became aware of it this week. So my next step is to actually just send an email and ask kind of what their thoughts are. I was not, I was involved in the Sunnyvale courthouse back when I was in Sunnyvale. I was not aware it had reopened. As far as I know, it's been closed since my days there, because at the time we did have those conversations with them as well. Maybe it reopened in the last 5 years, but it was only closed when I was in Sunnyvale. Gosh, got to be 8, 9 years ago now.
Yeah, I mean, they could be looking for a solution, so I think, now's the time.
All right.
So I will send an email out, and if when I hear a response from them, I'll work with Leslie to get a whatever response I get to the whole group.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, Manuel. Is there anyone, we can open it up to public comment. Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on this item? Mary? Are we taking online as well, right? Okay, I can't. You get to go first, Mary. Welcome.
Testing. My question is to Manuel. If the EIR is going to be complete when?
Circulates in May. I'm repeating what
This
Leslie
May?
said. Yes.
So then there's going to be a time period. But if the city has use for those two properties and already knows what they're going to be putting in there, like if they want to use the Commerce Building, there wouldn't be any Land Act problems, right? If the city can use the property and has a solution to that property for the city, then the Land Act does not take effect, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So I know we did a presentation on, and we lost our signal again I just want to make sure I'll stop here to whoever's. So I'll answer your question in a second. I just
Yeah,
want.
that's fine.
Yeah, I just want to, I know we have people, yeah, so. If we're on on Zoom, it's okay. I just want to. Andrew, can
I
you?
can hear you fine.
Andrew, you can see us on Zoom?
Yep.
Okay, all right, great, thank you. So we lost our internal feed and we weren't sure kind of what was going on. I appreciate that, Andrew.
Sure.
Yep, great. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, and I apologize, I just wanted to make sure it was working. So, yes, so the Surplus Land Act only applies when the city is surplusing land, meaning that they no longer have a use
For that.
or for a city purpose. But that would apply to any part of the acreage. So, if the city was going to, I think that part, going off memory, is about 6 acres, right? That we have there. If the city was going to use all 6 acres for a city use, then you go ahead and just build it. It's a city property. But say if they wanted to keep 2 acres and surplus 4 acres, you would still have to go through the process.
Okay, and I have one other question. You said that the May 6th was when the EIR would be complete of this year, right? and that the leases are up, the one lease is up May of next year, right? Then I should be safe in saying that we can have shovels in the ground in 2024, sometime in late 2024.
Yeah, so we went through the full schedule last time, and I'll go off memory again here because I do have the presentation, but I'm not going to pull it up. So the city has never said there's going to be an exact date for shovels on the ground, but I'll work through kind of where we're at on the next steps and so on. And I think we had the one slide that talked about that. So we're, EIR is May, and then so we'll probably be going to council in August? August, September council. Once you go to council, you do the Surplus Land Act. And the Surplus Land Act, the first step, it's a minimum 60 days, but realistically it's 90 days, so that's 3 months. And if you don't get any offers, then you can move forward to the next step. But for a property like this, let's assume you get some offers. So then you have to negotiate for a minimum, and that's a really minimum of another 90 days. But once again, it's probably a little longer than that. So just the Surplus Land Act process is going to take, I'd say 7 to 8 months, assuming that you'll get some interest in this property, not that we have to go through the whole thing. So that would put you from August, 8 months out. If we accept an offer, right, then you have to go through that process. If there is no offer that's accepted, then we have to do an RFQ to select a developer. And that selection, I would say best case scenario between writing the RFQ, putting it out, making a selection, probably take you 4 to 6 months, likely more than 6 months. And once you select somebody, then you have to negotiate with that developer to determine what the deal will be for the property. And that's going to take a number of months as well. Once you have a selected developer, then they would go through the building permit process and everything else. So that gives you a general time frame of how long it would take to get there, but there's way too many question marks right now for me to give you a schedule. I think I always say this, right? I focus on the next step. The next step is May, circulate the EIR in May, and then council consideration in August, September, and after that, I know I have to do the Surplus Land Act if we're going to not be using the property for city, which the precise plan right now doesn't have it for city uses. So those are the next steps. So we're between those two steps from September, assuming September, we're at least 8 months out from there to finish the Surplus Land Act process.
And then also, we already know that one party is interested in putting shovels in the ground right away, and that's the university. So immediately after the RFPs go out, I'm sure that the university will be putting in a bid to do their property on that corner.
So, and just to be clear, right, I'm only speaking about the city property. The private development property, which the university would be considered a private developer.
Exactly.
They or any other private developer within the precise plan would not go through a Surplus Land Act process, or they'll do whatever they need to do. And I can't speak to their timeframes or when they might develop. That's all driven by private industry.
Thank you very much. So it actually could, some shovels could be put in the ground earlier
Yeah,
if through private
the
development.
private development can move quicker than the public development.
Thank you very much.
And I can't speak to when that might happen.
There's a lot more steps in the public development. That's why I was talking earlier how I don't see it actually coming available in 2023. Really, it's probably going to be 2024 and beyond, right? So, or sorry, it was 2024, so it's not really going to be until 2025. So, I can't even get a permit in the city of Santa Clara for a commercial project in 4 to 6 months, and that's after all your design documents are complete. So,
That the city should hire personnel to speed up the process.
it's not just that. There's a lot of factors, like Manuel said, with a lot of different steps, and so it's the public land will take longer, but the goal is to keep moving forward and not missing more steps. So that's the good thing. I think we're all on track to move forward, and the courthouse is actually another nice benefit. So it could actually give us more options.
I understand.
So
I understand. Thank you.
I know we went, so I just do want to give you one more update as well, since we brought this to the last agenda, that we do have the RFP, RFQ concluded for the SVP study of 900 Lafayette, and we're going through a selection. We did get submittals of interest on that, so we'll be going through a selection process to do that analysis, to see if it's feasible and what the cost would be, and if there would be interest for SVP to use that building. We don't know. There's a lot of questions on that, but I brought it here last time as an update. It concluded. We're going through a selection process now.
All right. Leslie, is there any hands from the public online?
We do have 2 hands. Jack, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak.
Yes, I have a question about the niggers. I fucking hate the niggers. I think they should all. You can't unmute me. Shut the. You can't unmute me. If you mute me again, you're a faggot. You're a faggot if you mute me. Stop muting me, you dumb bitch. Stop muting me.
Okay, apologize for that. No. The next speaker we have is Skip. Skip, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak. I know.
Skip, welcome.
Skip, you can unmute and speak.
I thought I had. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
The Skip Pearson. I have a cold, so excuse my voice. The what Mary said, in my mind, is so relevant, and I think relevant to Rod, all the people in Rod, and that is to make it very clear that when City Hall comes back downtown, they're going to need a block, a whole block of downtown. And if City Hall decides to resurrect the new City Hall on the block facing Lafayette across from Wells Fargo Bank, that will take up that whole block. I am aware that the university owns a section of it. And if Silicon Valley Power, that needs 90,000 square feet, takes over the 90,000 square feet Commerce building, and the city bills or is a part of the construction of a garage in the rest of that block where the Commerce building is, in that event, there is no surplus land act considerations. So Manuel, if you would correct me if that is incorrect. Also, as I understand it, which was not pointed out in the last meeting a month ago, but I'd like confirmation from Manuel. From what I heard is that the city is paying, or Silicon Valley Power, which is the city owns, is paying 700 and something thousand in rent for the office building across from Home Depot on the corner of Martin and Lafayette. And I would like to know how long the city has been paying that kind of rent. If you could answer those questions, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Skip. Manuel, are you able to answer those tonight, or?
Yeah, no, so the rent, I think we shared with you before as part of the last presentation as well, and I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it's approximately $750,000 a year. I believe, I don't have the exact date of the lease. We extended the lease a couple of years ago. So generally, I think it's between a 5 to 10 year time frame that SVP has been at Martin Avenue, but I will have to double check that information if it's important to the group. I don't know when the first move was. Originally, they were at City Hall, and that's before my time. Regarding the rent, obviously the rent has gone up. So it's about approximately $750,000 is the current rent. It was not before that.
Sorry, I actually have a question. The 750,000 that SPP pays for rent, that's out of the out of the money that it collects from the utility rates, correct?
That's correct.
It's a moot point. I
Yeah.
think then it's not coming out of the city's budget. It's different because it's built into the rates and most of it's the burden of the data centers and the businesses for the most part, so.
And I apologize if I missed the second question. I thought it was more of a statement of where City Hall could go, but I think that's going through its own separate analysis that I believe you have.
We have a
presentation
discussion on that later in the evening, so we can wait for that.
Yeah, so once again, thank you, Leslie. So yeah, once again, if any property that's being used for city purposes does not require surplus land act because you're not surplusing it, you're using it for city purpose. The whole point of the surplus land act is to state that you no longer have a use for this property for a city purpose and you want to try to sell it.
And I think that was Skip's point.
So that is correct. And yeah, I apologize. I've heard it more of a statement than a question, but if that's the question, yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Manuel. Are there any other members of the public who have their hand up?
I have one more hand. Shane? Shane, you should be able to unmute and speak.
Welcome, Shane.
Hello? Okay, Shane disappeared.
Okay.
We have no other hands.
I just didn't recognize the name. I'm a little nervous right now with our first caller. All right, well, we'll close public comment on this items. Thank you, and we will move on to the second item of the evening.
Okay, the second item we have for you this evening is a presentation by our consultant, WRT, on the City Hall relocation study criteria and comparison. I believe they are all in attendance. See you all as panelists. Peter, let me know if I'm missing anyone as a panelist.
I think everyone's here, so that's good, and we're ready to go. And
Yeah,
excited
well,
to be back.
welcome, Peter and team. Go for it.
Thank you. Great. Matt, would you like to share the presentation, or shall I?
You should see it now, I believe.
Yep, very good. Thank you for inviting us back. I don't know what number we're on right now. It's maybe somewhere in the 30s, and you guys have stuck with a really, really rich process, and on we go. And we're getting into some good detail today that I'm looking forward to the discussion on. So we'll be looking good tee up from Skip. We will be looking at some site options for a relocated City Hall and SVP. Together, cumulatively, we think of those as the Civic Center. We've looked at 4 downtown sites. We're going to walk through those with you today. Matt, if you go to the agenda slide. But before we get there, we want to do a little intro on the existing Civic Center program, what it is made up of. And Susie Marzola from Siegel and Strain will make that part of the presentation. Then we're going to introduce criteria, because I think it's critical for us to have a common way to analyze the relative value from a variety of perspectives of different potential sites for a downtown civic center. So we'll talk about site evaluation criteria, and Matt Tacker from WRT will lead that part of the presentation. Then we'll introduce the sites and some sort of important financing concepts, and then we'll dive into the analysis of sites. And following that, we'll have, I'm sure, a good discussion. And I want to also recognize that in about half an hour, we have a good Warriors Kings game that we're all going to be missing at least the first half of. But so thank you all the more for being here tonight. So here we are. This slide is showing where we are in the Civic Center relocation study process. We have gone through a confirmation of the existing program, which we're going to introduce tonight. We've done an economic assessment and looked at case studies, which we brought to you last month. And following this work today, we'll be zeroing in, hopefully, on one site and looking at alternatives, some program alternatives. Maybe moving the entire Civic Center program, maybe just City Hall, maybe looking at a mixed use option. I think the specifics of that are gonna be affected by the conversation tonight. And then we'll be refining those concepts, and ultimately this will be coming together in a report. So as we go through the presentation today, we would like you to think about, and this is sort of our work for tonight, think about and then discuss the strengths and weaknesses of the sites that we studied. Maybe think about what's missing, and think about the criteria that we'll be introducing. How important are they? How important is each one? Should we think about weighting them in one way or another? And that discussion should help us get toward selecting a preferred site to study in more detail. Susie. Actually, I guess I can sort of give a little background on this. I think, as everyone here knows, there was a study done in 2019 that evaluated the space needs and potential options for rebuilding City Hall and the SVP office building on the existing Civic Center site. And so we're using the growth projections, the FTE growth projections for employees and their space needs. We're using that aspect of that study as our baseline. I think it's important to recognize that there may be some adjustments as this project potentially would get closer to reality, but this is just a good basis, good place for us to start. The existing Civic Center property, which you see just a simple massing study of here, has the City Hall building, which has east and west wings, and it's where you're sitting tonight. That's where most of the City Hall functions are. There are a few other buildings on the site. Some of them contain city offices. One building, I understand, is used primarily for storage. And then, as we heard in the first item, SVP leases space in an off-site office building. That's represented in blue in the corner as an inset. The existing City Hall and utilities taken together total about 175,000 square feet today. And the 2040 projections, based on that previous study, would be for an increase to about 245,000 square feet total. So about a 40% increase to account for a growing city and growing needs. Susie, I will hand it off to you.
Thanks so much. It's nice to be here. Thank you all for inviting us to participate in this process. I'm going to walk you through a few slides that are related to the spatial program as indicated for the City Hall, organized into two halves, the City Hall and the utility building. As was mentioned, the spatial programming work that was completed prior to our effort now indicated a total of about 175,000 square foot of existing development, which was on the previous slide. And if that was extrapolated to year 2040, the projected needs would indicate an overall increase of about 40%. So looking first at City Hall uses in the spreadsheet format, we list all the departments, the number of FTE occupants, and the area that those departments need. These departments are also kind of color coordinated. You can see them organized in bunches, the first four being the mayor and the city council office, city attorney office, clerk, etc. You can see that the first four is one bunch. The city auditor's office, finance, human resources need to be together. Information technology can be on its own, but it has tentacles throughout all the uses, as you know. Community development, fire department, and Department of Public Works need to be together. And then Park and Rec needs an administrative space in the City Hall. Those combine for a total. Add to that building commons and shared amenities. Most of these are shared by the city staff. Some can be shared by public, but those are organized into four general categories: the public entry and some meetings, shared meeting spaces. There's the council chamber, which we've called out as its own kind of with its own designation. There's shared uses by all city staff, which include meeting rooms, huddle rooms, other types of shared restrooms and shared uses of that nature. And then there's the building services, which electrical, mechanical, and building support services. All of those together come to about 155,000 square feet. That includes a circulation and grossing factor. So that's how we came to that 154,000, 155,000 for the City Hall program. Next. This diagram here is using rectangles that are in scale to one another, indicates the adjacencies that might be required between these different departments and department clusters. So the top half of this diagram showed the departments, and the bottom row show some of those shared uses. So the Public Works and Permit and Public Works is the largest department. Next to that is city leadership and finance, which are somewhat smaller in their square footages. Park and Rec is the smallest, and then information technology is pretty robust, as you can see there in that rectangle. Starting on the lower right corner, we indicate a public entry, which would include lobby, security, and some meeting rooms that could be shared with public. That entry lobby would want to have a pretty direct connection to a council chamber, which would be also used by the city staff and the public who come to those meetings. That's indicated with these orange lines. Another direct connection to that public entry system would want to be a public counter that's associated with the Permit and Public Works and Fire Department, actually, that would be in the square that's got the green text, if you will. There also needs to be some secondary access, but public access to city leadership, finance, and meeting spaces. The departments that are indicated in the rectangles that are indicated on the far left do not necessarily need public interface. Those being the Park and Rec, which is mostly administrative here, the information technology, and then of course the building services. So next slide. The next couple of slides have to do with the utilities building. There's two primary divisions in the utility building. One is Silicon Valley Power, and the other is water and sewer utilities, which are combined in this case. They also have some shared amenities and common spaces, the lobby, the entry, building support, shared office and huddles, or excuse me, shared meeting and huddle spaces. And in this case, in this program, as it was devised, included shared amenities such as a cafeteria and a fitness center for staff and employee use only. Unfortunately, I noticed this too late, but the total doesn't show up for this spreadsheet. We will be sure to add that on here before we distribute this to you. So next slide, please. So here is that adjacency diagram again. In this case, we have the two main departments that are separated on the top row and the bottom row. Silicon Valley Power on the top, which is the biggest use in this format in this building, and water and sewer, which is a much smaller, closer to 5,000 square feet, is on the bottom line. And the row in the middle shows all the shared uses, starting with the main entry on the far right, and then the shared staff use spaces, some amenities, and then building support. Two of these you can see are outlined in orange, meaning that the water and sewer divisions, as well as the shared amenities such as the cafeteria and the fitness center, staff use fitness center, can be associated with this building, or they could also be co-located in City Hall or located in City Hall. And depending on space allocation, phasing, where these buildings end up in terms of site selection may determine where those two uses that are indicated with the orange rectangle may end up. So next slide, go ahead.
Well, hi, Matt Tacker. This is a graphic depiction of that additional program, so you can eyeball it. This is not a literal proposal, but you get a sense of what the additional program for the city hall and for the utilities building
Matt,
would be.
Matt, I'm not seeing that representation yet. There we go.
Thank you.
There it is. So this one, just to finish up here, and I'll turn it back to you, Matt and Peter. But what this shows here is just a graphic depiction, as Matt was suggesting, of what would this additional square footage look like if it were just simply superimposed over what you have now. And it would basically mean adding a floor to the West City Hall, adding a floor to East City Hall, and adding a portion of a floor, a quarter to a third of a floor to your existing Silicon Valley Power building, as well as a floor to the office building that's in the lower right corner of your existing site.
Right. And this is an attempt to just graphically depict what the additional increment would be. Again, it's not a literal recommendation or proposal. And then this gives you a comparison of the site area. The Civic Center that you now enjoy with the City Hall and all occupies that middle block of the existing Civic Center site. The middle block is shown, the extent of it is shown in the blue outline, and the precise plan area is in the red outline. You can see that that middle block of the existing Civic Center is nearly 4 blocks of the new downtown once the new streets are extended through it. So site evaluation criteria. First off, a few caveats. First off, the comparisons are a starting point. We're really here to listen and to hear what your perspectives and what your values are. Variants are possible. We illustrated 4 alternative sites, but you could mix and match them if you'd like. As was mentioned earlier, we're interested in hearing what you think are strengths and weaknesses of each of the schemes. And we'll have an opportunity to weight the criteria based on what your values are at the end when we have discussion. What we hope to walk away with tonight, ideally, would be an indication of what you think the preferred site would be. Another consideration, I'll just put it out there and we'll mention it again later, and that is that we're considering not only the strengths and the weaknesses of the design scheme, but also what the opportunity cost is, and assigning a value to what might happen if the city hall didn't happen in a certain location gets to be kind of a complex proposition. And we're hoping to understand it better through your conversations tonight. The next steps, also as was earlier mentioned, was to do 3 schemes that vary the program on the same site so that we can begin to test what the financial and the funding advantages of each of those programmatic alternatives might be. So the site evaluation criteria, site control, it's very important. Is it city owned, which allows fairly direct path? Is it under if it's not city owned, is it under a single owner? How much parcel assemblage would be needed? Fit and activation. These criteria spring from the precise plan. Does it fit the allowable envelope? All the schemes do. Some do it a little more easily than others. Does it serve as a near-term catalyst? One of the reasons that we're looking at the downtown as a location for a new civic center is to generate activity and to create a kind of beachhead, really, as far as the downtown redevelopment with a little r, goes. Public realm activation, particularly along Franklin Street, as well as around the open spaces that are in the precise plan, is vital. And the Civic Center might do better or not as well at doing that. And then cultural space creation. There's some locations where cultural space has been recommended by the precise plan. Then funding and financing. And this is PFEL will be handling this part of the show as we reach those slides. Current uses and tenancy, what's there now? How easily could it move? Construction complexity. Sometimes there's what's called swing space, which means that you have to kind of move some elements around while other elements are being, constructed. Legal complexity, obviously something with a single owner has less complexity than if it has multiple property owners, for example. Funding availability, some conditions will allow some kinds of funding that other conditions don't. And financing complexity. So let's reacquaint ourselves with the downtown and take a look at the 4 sites that we're going to compare tonight. Here's your downtown precise plan area, and then you can see off to the left also the location of your existing civic center. You can see here really the importance of the Franklin Street spine, reaching the train station and the future BART station. Off to the east, Santa Clara University is just right across the street from Lafayette. Lafayette is a major corridor with more motorized traffic than your other streets surrounding the area. There's also a branch library that's noteworthy that's on Main Street. And so then we're taking a look at the downtown tonight. And we've got 4 sites, and there's the taxonomy, there's the organizational tool of block letters. That's a holdover from the precise plan. So we're going to be using that. And then we're also using maybe a more intuitive nomenclature to distinguish the different sites by calling one the Arts Commons. That's where the Arts Commons is proposed. And we're going to look at the ownership in a minute, but that's the city owned. And then there's the Central Green. That's where Prometheus has some low-rise apartment buildings. The Central Greens, we're going to look at the ownership again in a minute. And I'm going to tell you a story about each one of these guys at the next slide, but there's the Central Greens. That's where to orient you, that's where the state courthouse building is, or the state land is, and the courthouse building is. And then Swenson has a commercial center there. Then Franklin Square, I think you're all familiar with the commercial center that goes by the same name. And so here's just an aerial kind of snapshot, just to get you oriented again, the Arts Commons. The Arts Commons, it's about taking advantage of the land that the city already owns. It also has an advantage in that it has a very clear and prominent address along Lafayette. It has the university that's right across the street. And it has, there's one parcel that would not be built on for the Civic Center, but is adjacent and part of that rectangle, and that's owned by the Santa Clara University. The Central Greens North, again, I mentioned is Prometheus is there. That is, walk-up apartment buildings, lower intensity than is expected with the downtown precise plan, and while it is more complicated to build a civic center on private land, it also, doing so would provide an opportunity, a kind of catalyst for the intensification of that site than might otherwise happen in the near term. The Central Greens, again, includes the county or the courthouse site. There's also city land that's part of that area, and then there's also the Swenson Commercial Center, as I mentioned, and then the Franklin Square. That is city-owned land. It has the buildings, however, are privately owned as condominiums, so that adds a little bit of complexity there. So here's a diagram that shows the property ownership. So, moving from right to left in the same sequence that I did with the prior side, there's the Arts Commons. You can see the blue is the city-owned land. The salmon color is the Santa Clara University's piece. There's some talk about maybe a hotel happening, on that land. So that's kind of a interesting thing to consider. The Park Central Apartments, that's Prometheus. That's all while there are a couple parcels that are not Prometheus, the proposal that you're going to see stays on the Prometheus land. There's the Central Green. You can see both the city-owned land as well as the California court land. State of California owns that. And then the private parcel by Swenson is Block F. And what you can see between the Central Green North and the Central Green South are the greens themselves. So this diagram not only shows ownership, but also reminds us of where the open space is, which is an important organizing principle of the precise plan, where those open spaces reside. And then for Franklin Square, you can see the blue land. The blue again is the city-owned. The condominiums are shown in yellow, and then an out parcel is your very beautiful historic post office that's in the purple. So that was ownership. This is fit and activation, just a little preview. Does it fit the allowable envelope? And will it bring substantial numbers of new residents and employees to the downtown? What you see here off to the right is not literal buildings, but rather the building envelope that is allowed by the precise plan. And to explain the color coding of that, from bottom to top. On the bottom, and we're going to see a better version of it in a minute, on the bottom are the uses required on the ground floor. There's some places where activation, because it's retail or some other similarly active use, is really, really important. Then the next layer up is the white. Those are your base heights under the precise plan, assuming that no density would be applied for housing or community benefits as is provided in the precise plan. And then on the top is the blue, and that would be with the bonus. So it gives you a sense of kind of, where the building volumes are. The building volumes drop down near the neighborhoods and they build up towards the center of the site. And so another one of our questions, with this diagram in mind is, does the broad project accelerate positive change in the downtown? Here's that diagram I mentioned that shows just the ground floor uses. And so, the question is, does the project create and maintain activity in key locations next to public open space? Those are the green areas, or along Franklin Street. That's your middle spine there, running east to west. And the red bars show your what's called the retail use. It also includes other uses that would be similarly active. There's a salmon color that's retail ready. That means that it wasn't seen as being essential to have high levels of activity in the very near term, but then long term, we'd like it to fill in with retail or something similar. The cultural anchors are the, I guess I want to say magenta, kind of the pink purple. And you can see that there are two that are associated with the Arts Commons. There's a Performing Arts Center on Block A, there's a theater on Block B, and then you get to Block F, and there's some cultural space that's, proposed as the part of the precise plan there. And so, to what extent do each of these alternatives help support the creation of those? We're also going to be using as a reference point this diagram. This diagram is another way of coding where we want to have high levels of activity. where we want buildings to be opening up to the street with frequent entrances and windows and activities seen through those windows. And so those are the dark lines. Those are the solid lines. It's called retail frontage. And you can see that there's a lot more retail frontage along Franklin than other streets, and there's retail frontage along around the open spaces. Retail ready is sort of the next tier where it's desirable, but it's not required. And then there's flexible frontage in other locations. In the yellow, you can see Franklin, as well as Main Street, is a very, very important street connecting to the south towards where there's the public library. And one of the features of the precise plan is that that particular segment of Main Street is extra wide to allow more landscaping, a grander experience. Lafayette is another important street to just note, and that is your very important urban arterial through the area. So here's our block boundaries again, same diagram, but with the boundaries shown, just kind of get, again, to reorient, to keep you oriented before we get into each of the individual sites. And then in terms of introducing the criteria before we get to the individual sites, PFAL, I think Victoria is going to speak to this and maybe the next slide also.
Sure, thanks, Matt. So what we've done is to look at a couple of different options that could exist for the city to tap into in terms of available revenue and also available financing options. In terms of the transaction structure that the city could use to deliver these projects, there are a couple of different considerations that we have considered in the scoring of the site criteria. So these are laid out here. So the current uses, construction complexity, legal and financing complexity. So those are some key issues that get incorporated into that scoring. On the next slide. What we have here is a couple of slides that are really intended to be taken away and reviewed at your leisure. But what we've done is to look at different types of funding that could exist for the city to help advance the project. So in this case, we've laid out a number of different options. We've allocated a risk rating to them based on how difficult we think it would be to actually secure that type of revenue, and then to rate its potential impact. So some of these options are high risk, but don't potentially generate as much revenue as others. So obviously what the city would want to do is to find the lowest risk option with the best potential for providing full funding for the whole project. What we want you to take away from these is not so much the detail of this content at the moment, but really to just emphasize that there isn't really going to be a silver bullet for how to pay for any sort of development that the city wants to undertake. It's going to require a combination of different sources, also some different financing strategies that can help reduce debt service costs over the long term. But ultimately, the project will need to be funded through sources, and these are just a few ideas that we've put forward here. These are also more types of revenue. Some of them, the last few being lower risk, but not having much revenue potential available. There are some other options that would be a bit more challenging from a political perspective. So this would be selling city property and also implementing potentially a new tax. So these are things that would require a lot of consideration before they're advanced. These options are different types of financing alternatives that exist. And I think it's important to emphasize here that there is no way to finance yourself out of a funding shortfall. There are creative and innovative financing strategies that can be used to reduce financing costs, but ultimately any sort of debt is going to carry interest costs, and it's also going to have to be repaid. So here we have a couple of different options for the city to mull over, again, at your leisure. New market tax credits are eligible for use within the area that we're talking about here. The location of the different developments, as Matt has laid out, are eligible for TIFIA and RIF loans. So that means that these are loans that are available through the U.S. Department of Transportation. They are subsidized loans with flexible terms. They're credit-based programs, so it's not a grant that would have to be applied for. And these are the lowest cost of financing that are available in the market. These do need to be paired with other sources of financing. So they're only eligible to be used for up to 75% of the total project cost in the case of the RIF loan. And they can only be used for properties that are being used by the public sector. So buildings that have retail use, for example, on the ground floor would need to be condominiumized. So that does obviously create a complication, but it's workable. We did do some evaluation just to help kind of frame the discussion a little bit about what the total debt service cost would be for a $350 million project and a $400 million project. And the results of that very rough analysis are here. This is really just intended to give you an order of magnitude sense of what the repayment would look like for these loan products. We've made a number of assumptions that need to be verified or subject to change. And these rates are the rates that we used are based on a loan that closed 2 days ago. So obviously there's a chance for those rates to change in one direction or another. But the upshot is that for a $350 million or $400 million project, you're looking about a $20 million debt service payment each year.
So this is a map that shows the kind of an early assessment of the area that's within that half mile of a railroad. The TIFIA and the RRIF loans also can be used within half a mile of an intercity bus service. And so our initial assessment is that it also includes El Camino Real, where there's frequent high quality bus service. What does that mean? That means that blocks A and B, the Arch Commons area, and the south and north Central Greens areas are within half a mile. We would need to, double check this, but our initial assessment is that the Franklin Square blocks are outside of that distance, so they would not qualify. Okay, so now we're going to get into the sites themselves. Begin with the Arts Commons, blocks A and B. It's also got the number 1, so hope to keep everybody straight. Anyway, here we go. Here's the ownership. Just a little reminder. Got the city. You can see the green is an overlay. That's where the Arch Commons plaza would be. And the salmon is Santa Clara University, and in the scheme that we're going to show here does not put any development on that, but it's an important adjacency to consider. Here's a urban design diagram just to call out some of the features. Again, the plaza in green, but also the asterisks show cultural anchors posed by the precise plan. Another important feature of this site is there's an existing office building which has a reuse opportunity that's on the corner of Homestead and Lafayette. And this is the block pair that is closest to regional transit, although I think it's safe to say that, all of these are within walking distance of the train station. Here's a 3-dimensional view. It's one scheme. There, could be variance on this, but I think it does a good job of laying out the fundamentals. You can see the orange, that's the City Hall program, and the blue is the utilities building program. And then there's the other colors. Red is an active use, that would be retail, or there's the market hall, that's the one-story pavilion that's next to the Arts Common Plaza. And then you can see the purple, the magenta is the cultural space. And so that's tucked in behind some active uses facing right on directly onto the Arts Commons. The public parking, something that's proposed as part of the precise plan, and would serve this as well as private development. And private development is also worth noting in all of these schemes. It's not just where the city hall is, it's also where it puts the mixed use development. And again, a reminder, it's also about opportunity cost. If the city hall didn't happen here, would this be you know, a prime location for another use that might, you know, activate the downtown, and the city hall activation could go somewhere that's maybe more difficult as far as being a catalyst goes. So the mixed use private development, you know, that's on the south side of Franklin Street. And it's assumed, you know, assumed to have a retail ready use, or retail use, I'm sorry, active use on the ground floor. And of course, there's the Santa Clara University is a campus across the street. And there's the possibility of the Santa Clara University development adjacent to the north. Victoria.
So what we've done is to go through and rank each of the sites based on the different criteria that we've discussed. So the idea here is that this is kind of ranked like a golf score. So the closer to one you get, the better you are. And what we've done here is to lay out some of the opportunities and challenges associated with each of the different sites.
Right. So there's the advantage of it being city owned, and the uses that would be displaced are fairly minor. There's the assumption of reuse of the go back to that. This utilities building is assumed to reuse the office building that's already there. And so what you can see here is a rating system with the criteria, you know, with ones being favorable, and we're going to summarize all these various ratings for each of the sites, and for each of the criteria are going to get summed up in a matrix that we'll present just before we have discussion on your perspectives. So then the next pair that we're going to look at is the Central Green North, block C and E, also known as number 2. And there you go, you know, kind of, these are kind of simple diagrams, but they're good reminders, I think, before we, you know, talk about it. Let's all be, you know, kind of clear on what the implications might be. All yellow, E, you know, E and C. It flanks these the larger of the two greens, and so, you know, it offers that opportunity for activation. There's also this symbol that we're using for visibility from the Arts Commons. So one corner of it would be pretty easily seen from, you know, the Lafayette Gateway, but no cultural anchors as part of this. And here's the arrangement. Basically, you can have twins flanking the greens with entrances facing each other. And the greens could be designed in a way where that stretch of Main Street actually is expressed more like a plaza. That would be called a shared street. You'd still allow traffic, but be very easy to get across. And so those two greens could be, you know, joined, and that sense of open space could be created. A sense of a single open space could be created between the two structures. What you can see is the orange, again, the city hall use. with retail ready use facing Franklin and a little bit of active retail there at the base of the city hall. And then utilities building, that building is not just the utilities building. This is probably one of the, generally vertical integration presents challenges because you end up having to have slightly different structural systems. You have to have building systems that have to thread their way through the different floors, maybe in a different way and so forth. And so in this particular scheme, the fit is not as ideal as other schemes because what you have is a utilities building and probably easy to get up floor of City Hall uses. Below it, that's the orange that's sandwiched, but then below that is a parking garage. And then below that is the retail space.
The scoring here is not quite as favorable as site number 1. The main reason for that is because we view this, the real estate transaction that would have to occur in order to enable the development of this site to be quite complex. There already is residential housing on this site. It's owned by a single owner, which is favorable, but we understand that the it's a profitable venture that owner is undertaking, and so basically it makes the cost of the property just quite high, and we think that it's probably an unattractive option for the city to pursue. The other scores are reasonably favorable, so in our range, you can either get a 1, 2, or 3, and so in this case, we view the construction complexity with the swing and relocation issues, and also the lack of city ownership as being as being worthy of the 3 penalty.
So then moving south, we're going to look at Central Green South and how those square away. Here you go, little diagram reminder. Blue is city, green is California. Yellow is private. And as you might recall, if you're participated in the precise plan development and all, in order to get an extension of Main Street through, we looked at and figured out a way to create kind of a land swap that would allow the property lines to sync up align with the edge of right of way. So in that sense, it's sustainable, but you are working with 3 different property owners. The California land would be, assumed to be surplused, which seems like a real possibility here. Let Victoria speak to that a little bit more later. Here's the urban design diagram, where you can see that special street treatment in the perspective, as well as shown in plan view. That's the wider right-of-way that celebrates really that connection down to the Mission Branch Library. There's cultural anchors proposed. That would require the courthouse relocation, and a couple of its corners are visible from the Arts Commons. Here's the 3D depiction, I think, which kind of explains it even better. Where you can see the civic spine. Again, it allows this sort of flanking of Main Street. In this case, you could, if you express that segment of Main Street more as a plaza that allows traffic to go through it, that's called a shared street. You could really, make these buildings, bring them together functionally and also symbolically. This also has the parking that's sandwiched between the utilities building and the ground floor. It's not unheard of. But it's, it does complicate things a bit. It's not as clean as if it's the same use throughout. And then the retail on the ground floor facing the green, and retail ready facing the green off to the right. And the mixed use buildings, again, important to think about, how they benefit. I would say that both of the central green scheme do serve a purpose in that they help to catalyze development in locations that might otherwise lag and help to activate the adjacent private uses in a way that might not be as needed as much on the Arts Commons space, which has the excellent visibility from Lafayette and the Franklin Square block has that visibility from Monroe, which doesn't have as much traffic as Lafayette, but is still a significant address.
This particular site scores reasonably well compared to the other sites. The construction complexity is the same issue that arose with the last site. So it's the need for swing space and relocation during construction sort of warrants a 3 score. The other 2 scores are mostly because of the city ownership and the lack of a single owner. So those things are challenges. They're, could be overcome, but we think that they do make the site more unattractive than some of the others.
So finally, Franklin Square, blocks G and H. There we go. Ownership, condominiums, post office is in there too, but is not part of the proposed scheme, which we've and there's another view accentuating the square, reminding us of the post office. Let's hope that, I think most of us hope that the Postal Service continues to have retail space, but it has been pulling back, and so in the very long term, I think one might consider this to be a reuse opportunity. And then here's the scheme. And so the scheme concentrates the city hall on that north block, activates Franklin Square, which in this scheme, rather than being centered on Franklin Street the way the fountain is now, it would move to that north Franklin Square site, talking about the open space, Franklin Square. And the city hall is there orange with the retail and parking. Parking is behind the more active edge facing the green. And then parking would also be at the base of the utilities building, the blue, and the utilities building stepping down towards Homestead with the residential fabric beyond. A mixed use building would flank Franklin Street across from the city hall. And then the Franklin Square and the city hall would be across from the historic post office.
This site also compares reasonably favorably to some of the other sites. The legal complexity of the property ownership, we think, is a pretty significant challenge to this site. The funding access also is lessened by the fact that this site is, we think it's probably outside of the eligibility zone for RIF and TIFIA loans. That remains to be seen, but or verified rather. So we do think that this one is kind of scoring right in the middle of the range that we've assigned. I do want to mention also, these are just straight averages of the numbers that we've put in here. So based on, as Matt had mentioned, the values that you want to assign to each of these different scores, they can be weighted differently, so that different issues basically present in a different way because of the way that the different criteria get weighted in the averaging.
Right. And so when we get to the discussion part, we can open the spreadsheet live and noodle with the numbers. So so it aligns with your perspective in terms of what might get more or less weight. So just to sum up, we got our ownership. You can see the ownership scores summarized on the top there. Arts Commons scoring well, Central Green North and South. I think based on your comments, Victoria, maybe Central Green North would score a little less or not as well, but again, that's something we can adjust. Fit and activation, they all do pretty well at it. Central Green North, we thought did a little less well because it didn't create any cultural space, and Franklin Square made up for that because it just fits so easily in the envelope. You can get the city hall functions all on one site, and the utility building functions on the other site, and the parking fits pretty easily on the Franklin Square scheme. There's just a little reminder, another view and another way of thinking about the fit and activation using this diagram. And then funding and financing, both with a summary of what we've already presented as far as the matrix goes on the upper right, and then PFEL developed a more detailed matrix that appears on the lower left. I don't know if you want to add to that, Victoria. You good? Okay.
Yeah, we're fine. Go ahead.
All right. Great. So here's the site comparison. More or less. And, again, we can noodle with these numbers live after I do a little bit of preparation. But so just a little reminder of some of the key questions. Should any criteria be emphasized, more or less, the relative weight, or any criteria missing, something that we overlooked? Be interested in your perspective on that. And then the comparisons themselves, what strengths and weaknesses for you for each of the sites, and what site, in your view, would score highest. So I will move back a slide and leave it here. And that concludes the presentation.
All right, thank you, WRT, appreciate it. So I will open it up for discussion to the DCTF members. We probably want to, do you want to go through this first, Matt? This, any adjustments, and then go through, I'm sure that we have probably questions on the slides.
Actually, I think go ahead and have some discussion. I have to queue up the spreadsheet. So it's
Okay, sounds good. All right, I'll open it up for the DCTF for any questions that you may have about the presentation. Sorry, go ahead, Jen.
Thank you for sharing all of these numbers and lovely diagrams. My one question is going back to the 2019 study about the projections for 2040 and how much office space is needed. I'm wondering if you've done more recent projects or seen any more recent projections, given that we have moved into this space of remote work. So is that still the amount of space that we would expect is needed by 2040, or would that get adjusted based on sort of post-COVID office space work realities? I know San Francisco is very different, but all of their office spaces are basically getting cleared out right now. So I'm just wondering how realistic the study from 2019 is now, considering we're in a slightly new landscape of where people do their work and what kind of space is needed for that if people are working remotely, some days a week. And maybe our city folks can also tell us, is there any conversation at the city level of what the remote work policy is, or, is there a longer term plan for people to work remotely some days from home? I don't know what that's like. But if there are other sort of more recent studies that you've seen that have taken into consideration this remote work part, how would that affect the amount of space that's been projected for Santa Clara?
I can start that discussion because obviously the consultant team took the 2019 numbers and used those numbers as we had discussed as part of the scope. So I'll start with the second question first about the remote work policy. And currently what the city has, and obviously, right, it varies by department. Certainly, and also we have our operations who have to be out on the field or whether it's, parks, whatever, or, SVP every day. But for the office staff within City Hall, we have a 3-day policy where you have to be at City Hall 3 days, and you can work offsite 2 days. Some people are here more, right? But 3 days is a minimum requirement as part of that. That can, of course, change at any point. We always keep open where that might go. So, but that's what we currently have today, is a 3-day minimum. From a space perspective, so certainly I think that, I met with the consultant team on this, and certainly those numbers could change, right? And it's not just COVID, but you got to remember, and I say this all the time, when we put this plan together, there was never an assumption that we were rebuilding a new city hall. We were focused on building a new utility building. And when we put it next to the campus, we were trying to add some facilities that were needed within this building, within the new building that was being built. So that square footage, if you really get to a point where you're doing something new, would likely change. I would say, for example, the utility building at 90,000 square feet, you likely wouldn't go any higher than that because we were combining spaces. You could probably move some of the spaces back and forth between, the City Hall building, the utility building to comprise a whole civic center complex. From a growth perspective, we did take a good look at that time, but the assumption at the time was 5 days a week. But I would say things are changing on that as well. When we did that, we didn't expect that Silicon Valley Power was almost going to double in size over the next 5 to 10 years. So that's a change as well. But based on based on kind of the scope that we had, we used the previous numbers because I think it gives you a good idea from a general kind of just high level, what it would take to do, what the cost would be, but if there is a project at some point, everything would have to be revisited again before you move forward. So I would expect changes would happen. I just don't know what those changes would be at this point.
Can I piggyback on that? Taking the flip side of that too, with the way we are going more and more online, services being done over the internet rather than walk-up trade. So compound that with remote work plus clients not coming to use the facility, the impact that might have on size. But the other part of that is, which I think for me is a little bit more important, is if we're moving in that direction, if we're looking at our City Hall in the future, and we start putting services online, footprint shrinks, I'm more concerned about the activation. Are we going to have a building that in our downtown that's going to clearly activate the space, or is it going to be somewhat of a dead building? And I think part of that can be tied to today. How active with foot traffic is this building today, excluding COVID, compared to what we're looking at in the future?
And I will probably ask Leslie or Andrew or Rena to help me, but I'll start. And I'll say that, we probably have, generally, like most departments don't get that much activity, except for like developers coming in to have meetings, other meetings that are happening, that sort of thing. We do have a couple of active spaces, right, that are supposed to be more active, and that's where I'll ask for help. We have our finance counter, but most utilities, most payments do happen online. I mean, I walk through there a couple of times a day, and it's rarely that I see 1 or 2 people at that counter getting service, but you do see it. And of course, the one I'll ask for additional help here is the community development counter, where they provide what I call counter services. And certainly I know they've gone to a more appointment and online permitting process, but I'll ask them to add how much. Certainly there was some activity there, but I do think the way we do business now, that has decreased. So I don't know, Leslie, if you can add to that.
Yeah, I don't know. I see, Andrew, you popped your video on. Did you want to speak first, or I can go and talk about planning generally?
Yeah, I don't know if you had any specific statistics on it, but I know that, demand certainly dropped significantly during COVID when we reopened. we have maybe 10% of the traffic we had before. I'd say it's picked up a little bit more in the last couple months, but we used to have sometimes 30 plus people in the lobby. I think the most I've seen since we've reopened is 8 when I've gone through, and it's usually often empty or there's maybe 1 or 2 people.
And Andrew, am I right that, we have gone to some online, more online
Sure.
permitting as
Oh,
well?
yeah, I mean, at the very beginning, we very quickly, we always talked about doing things without, going paperless and improving our electronic services. And, back in March of 2020, that became a necessity to do that as quickly as possible to stay open. I'm proud of the fact that we didn't ever really miss a beat with that. And we just found a way to do things electronically. And if you think about it for, like a contractor or, on a big project, to print out big plan sets costs a lot of money. And then to carry them down to City Hall is not easy, and to hand them over the counter. Instead, now they just push a button on the computer and we receive them electronically. So, there's a lot of efficiency for people that, that don't think that we'll ever go back to seeing that in paper like we did before. Once we've learned how to do things electronically, people just prefer it's more convenient. Or if you're coming down from Sacramento for a meeting, it's a lot easier to do it online now that that's a commonly accepted practice. And there are a few people who really value that in-person experience, and so we accommodate those as well, of course.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, taking a step back on the City Hall project, I look at it 2 different ways. The one way I look at it is City Hall can be looked at kind of from a sentimental viewpoint. It's kind of the heart of your city, but I also look at it from a practical sense. And looking at this downtown project, for me, it's about activation. It's about catalyst. It's about making sure this downtown succeeds. And I'm not quite sure, or I've not been convinced yet that a City Hall downtown is the right way to go to make sure this downtown becomes successful. Again, I'm not an expert at this. I'm just taking the information they have, but I do have some concerns. We're talking about picking A, B, C, or D. Is there an E, which is a none of the above?
Well, quickly, can I just remind everyone that this is just a study to see what moving City Hall downtown would look like. So yes.
Yeah, could we look at that slide again, the final scores? Because I want to make sure I understand the outcome and the definition and the thought process that went into the near-term catalyst category. I think
Right.
that I just want to understand, why something got a 1 and something got a 2 in that category.
In the catalyst.
Yes.
Arts Commons got a less favorable score because, in our view, it displaced private development on a site where it might be most easily attracted because of the visibility on Lafayette, foremost, and not having the the streets pushing through and so forth seems to be stands alone pretty well. And so, and in the other locations, there's stuff going on. In all the other locations, there are active uses that would have to move, and therefore, having the civic center occur on those sites is making something happen that might take a long time otherwise.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, Matt, some of the other sites would enable the creation of streets that otherwise are going to be hard to catalyze, and the associated public realm and activation that would come with those.
But you can notice that this is a slightly different version that was in the slideshow. This is a version we can play with the scores that we presented in our presentation. On the left side of they've got the color and they got the blue numbers, and then waiting for your input if you like. You know,
Yeah.
you're free not to play with this if you don't want to, but in red, what's awaiting is a chance to play with this if the task force wants to.
Yeah, well, that cleared it up for me because what I've been thinking near-term catalyst meant was what's going to bring the largest amount of retail customers to the area the quickest. And that's a slightly different context than I think what your definition is. So I understand now, you know, the view that you took to come up with those scores. So thank you.
Well, yeah, and thanks for bringing that up. And, you know, Ben Sigmund of EPS spoke to that a little bit. And I think our perspective is that all of the sites would bring about the same number of employees. And so that spending power would be equal among all 4 schemes.
Okay, I've got a couple things. So, let's see, I want to jump into and Tiffy and RIF is something that's near and dear to our group's heart. We've been looking at that pre-COVID. But I want to jump to activation points. I think it's a very fair statement to say that, you know, will City Hall by itself activate the retail of the downtown? That's what we're all sitting there going, will that happen? When we did our study, we looked at that, but we were more looking at, will City Hall activate other private development that would then activate people in retail? So, you know, that's something that we saw in multiple cities. It was a dead city, and once the City Hall went in, private development came in afterwards, and that really stimulated the revenue. So I think that's something that, you know, I asked the group to look at, that, you know, private development follows public development in each of the cities that we have seen. The other thing is the inelastic or elastic standpoint of city employees versus the gyrations of the economy when, you know, companies lay off or move or change or what have you. And we have a very stable workforce within the City Hall. Granted, post-COVID, you know, could change things, but I guess a question to Manuel is, looking 20 years ahead, and this is something WRT came up with, you're looking at 40% growth of employees?
Dan, I would have to go back and look at the spreadsheet. I don't know if one of the consultant teams can let me know. I did not go back and check the growth number on that.
Right, but you see growth.
Yes, we did expect growth because as the city grows, services grow, and then staff needs to grow. So we looked at kind of the expected growth with the city, and then looked at in alignment with the department's growth, and then kind of worked with all departments to see if those growth numbers made sense. That's kind of what we did back then.
The way the City Hall is right now, let's say it stays put, pre-COVID, you know, we heard from employees some of the nightmares that you guys were pretty crammed in there. Has that changed, and do you see that changing? You don't have to do anything for 5 years because of COVID?
Yeah, so the big change that occurred since then, and we did have some space issues, is at the time, we had some SVP staff that was located at City Hall, and that SVP staff has completely relocated to the Martin Avenue building. So actually, currently, we have empty office space at City Hall. So we have capacity for growth within the building.
How long do you see that? I mean, you don't have a crystal ball, and I get it, but you see it filling back up, right? And this problem coming back in 4 years, 5 years.
Well, I can't tell you when there will be a space need again. So I definitely don't have a crystal ball. We do have, basically, we have utilized some of the old SVP space. I would say that we haven't maximized that space because there's enough space available where you don't have to do it. But at this point, we have additional capacity. So that move created a significant amount of available space that we didn't have previously in context of this building, right? I mean, it was, I forget how many staff we moved over, but we do have actually unused cubicle space right now.
Okay, got it. So once again, we're, going back to the last meeting, that's one of the things that stuck with us with a couple examples that were cities that were not selected, that we did hear from their city managers, their city council members, that, again, City Hall went in, and it wasn't about City Hall, it was about what happened after City Hall. That, again, private development came in, hundreds of millions of bucks, and small cities came in, and that activated the retail, party kind of in that area. Okay, I want to go to financing if I could. So Tiffy and RIF, and this is to WRT. How deep did you go into that? And because we're starting to get pretty deep into it as far as not, in the beginning, we didn't understand that they could finance not only areas right around the transit area, but the streets, the infrastructures, and the buildings, as you mentioned, and offer, credit terms that are incredible. They're tied to the Treasury, very low interest loans. You don't have to pay those loans until you put a nail in wood. How deep did you apply Tiffy and RIF to this?
I can answer that, Matt and Peter. So in the analysis that we ran, we used a capital cost that was provided to us by the city. So we had understood that the city was looking at capital costs in the range of 350 to 400 million. So we just ran those, assuming that all of those costs were eligible for financing through the Build America Bureau. So we calculated 75% of that total cost for a RIF loan and 49% for a Tiffy loan.
Okay, one more time. I'm sorry, 49% for?
A Tiffy loan.
Okay. Okay, great.
And 75% for a RIF loan.
And Victoria, that's included in your slides, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, I just see people taking notes. I want to make sure they know that's included in the presentation.
Okay, great. Good.
With a very heavy health warning that it's based on assumptions that we have not verified based on a loan closing 2 days ago. There's a lot of analysis that still needs to go into that to give you a good number, but that gives you kind of a ballpark estimate of where a debt service number would lie.
Have you talked to DOT?
We have a lot of involvement with DOT. We actually had approached them for another client for a county who was looking to borrow one of these TOD loans. So we looked at both the RIF and the TIFIA program. My firm is also an advisor to the TIFIA and the RIF program. So we've got about $8 billion worth of their loans under our belts. And we had talked to them actually before we got engaged with this about the Caltrain system and confirmed that that was eligible for the TIFIA and RIF programs. And that's pretty unique for a commuter rail system because a rail system has to be regulated by the FRA for the area to be eligible.
Yeah, it's incredible. And beyond city, the issue of City Hall, it's for the whole downtown. There's what, $100 million in RIF right now? 100 billion, I think, in RIF. So
there's some great options there.
Incredible.
It's it is a bit tricky because it's a new policy. There's a lot to navigate, but I can tell you that they actually just advanced another TOD loan in Washington for a library complex. So they've managed to navigate a lot of the policy issues that were coming up when we had started speaking with them about this. So there's good progress on their side. It's definitely worth engaging with them if this or other projects are being advanced.
If they meet the criteria, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, and then I'm going to come back one more time. Manuel, I'm so sorry I'm doing this. So everything's kind of breezy, it's open, things are great in City Hall. When do you see this need coming back up? Let's say it's gone away. You know, you got lots of space, people aren't in closets anymore.
So just to clarify, I did not state everything was breezy and open and everything was great at City Hall. Those were your words, not mine.
It is going to happen again.
Yeah, so,
We're gonna need City Hall.
because, no, and my context in that is because obviously the building's older. There are some capital needs that are needed, and that's very clear. We stated that to the council before. And some are pretty expensive as well. And, you know, at some point, you know, our facilities team does a great job of maintaining the building, and we do some of that work along the way. I think the question was specific, because I wanted to clarify that some of the issues we highlighted in 2019 with space are no longer there, because we have moved a significant number of staff members. All of SVP has moved over, which clear, you know, SVP had down in the, what they call it, I'll call this 0.5 floor. Some people call it the basement. We'll call it the 0.5 floor. We had two areas where SVP was located, and we completely cleared those areas out and left them open. And right now we do have open cubicles. There is no time frame for a new City Hall building. There is no money for a new City Hall building. And even as I always say, because, you know, sometimes it gets lost, even when we did the master plan was intended to locate a utility building where it made sense. There was no funding strategy or planning for a new City Hall. So when are those office spaces going to be occupied? I can't say. Certainly, I think, you know, we get requests for it. I have a little map I get that I meet with people like Andrew and our utilities director and other people who might have a vision for this space, but we haven't determined that. Depending on what the need is, there's different ways to fix that. But at this point, we don't have people working in closets anymore like we did back then, because we created that capacity.
Okay, I think that's it for me now.
Thank you, Dan. Anyone else? All right, you want to open it up to the public? If any member of the public would like to speak on this item, please come forth or raise your hand. If you're on the call, you will be allowed to speak. Okay. Go ahead, Mary. Welcome.
My space here, so hold on. There's somebody on the line that wants to speak.
I do have one person on Zoom.
Mary, do you want us to let the person on the phone go first, or? Oh, okay. We'll let them go first.
All right. All right, Skip, you should be able to unmute and speak.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Welcome, Skip.
Thank you. Just from looking at it a little differently, if City Hall and joined Silicon Valley Power and moved out of City Hall and rented a private office building like Silicon Valley Power has done, then we'd have an empty City Hall building, and it would be costing the city millions of dollars in rent every year. But that's the reason why we have space in City Hall, because Silicon Valley Power moved into a rental building where the city's paying a private party currently around $750,000 a year. while a completely owned building built in the 1980s, a commerce building, has 90,000 square feet, which is what Silicon Valley Power says it needs. And as to the question, well, maybe they won't need it because of COVID in the future and people working from home. Well, if you don't need it, then you just use the offices that you need and you rent out the other offices. It's an office building. It doesn't have to be all Silicon Valley Power. And the existing commerce building is already set up for tremendous retail with 15-foot ceilings on the bottom. A B of A used to be there. It could be easily converted to any kind of retail. And the thing that kind of concerned me when I was looking at the various places that City Hall could possibly go is in the block where the courthouse is now. It looked to me like there were two garages across from each other, one on block A and one on block, I guess, C it was. If that was correct, I don't understand why there can't be a half a block behind the Commerce Building completely devoted to at least a 6-story garage. You have that in downtown Campbell. Downtown Campbell's blocks are the exact same size as City of Santa Clara's downtown blocks. They're about 300 by 300 feet, about 2 acres each block. And the city of Campbell's success, their downtown success, is largely based on building a garage on half a block in the town center. The only problem was they only built it 3 stories, so it's always full. So it should be taller than the designated, I think it was maybe 5 stories max, but that's counting the bottom retail story. So I'd like that clarified. If I was correct in looking at the where it appeared to me to be 2 garages side by side. I think garage generally stands for 1 garage downtown and a tall garage. And as far as the placement of City Hall or the placement of the utilities or the placement of the garage, it should be accessed, ingress and egress, from Homestead. Homestead is not a busy street, and it's an extra wide street. You don't want the public or the city workers or Silicon Valley workers going into downtown to park when they can enter and exit off of Homestead. Homestead is perfect for entering and exiting for City Hall and for the garages or garage and for Silicon Valley Power. So if I could get some clarity on the 2 garages that look like they're across from each other, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Skip.
Sure, I'll just show that scheme. Bear with me a sec. Well, again, these schemes are preliminary. And it's really after we kind of arrive at a site that we'll start to really dig into how the parking could be configured and whether it really makes sense integrating it vertically with the building or whether there's the opportunity for the parking to go on an adjacent site, And so what you see here is the parking incorporated in the 2nd and 3rd floor of the utilities building, and then a parking garage immediately behind it. So, we'd want to really dig in and look at what the parking demand in the immediate vicinity would be, and whether it's even necessary to have these stories in the utilities building or not. So right now they're shown there because it's a building that could be as big as what's shown, but maybe it would be smaller without the parking.
Matt, can I add something here? I think what Skip is actually looking at is the other garage, which is still showing across Washington Street from the garage that would be supporting the Civic Center. And I think, Skip, that we could say that's a part of the existing downtown model that we simply didn't adjust because we were focusing on this site concept. So I'm not sure. I think you could reasonably say that potentially this Civic Center garage could support the Arts Commons, and there may not be the need for that second garage. But I don't want to say that with certainty. I think, but I see your point about seeing two garages side by side.
Mr. Chair, if I may as well.
Go ahead, Memo.
Yeah, just a reminder, and I know I mentioned it
happening now.
earlier today, but we are going to be studying if Silicon Valley Power staff can move to the 900 Lafayette building. We talked about it at the last meeting, and earlier today I gave you an update that we had consultants submit. We'll go through a selection process and kind of go from there. I always want to say it as well. We don't know if it's feasible, and feasible is also financially reasonable to do that based on what the building needs might be, but that's what the study is going to tell us. But we are in the process of studying that. Well, selection process to start the study.
So that means you're probably like over a year out from actually getting that report.
We haven't started the selection process on it yet. I don't want to guess what a schedule might be until I talk to the consultants, but a year would not be unreasonable, no. But because we have to
Yeah, I'm
negotiate
just
a
thinking
contract.
plus
first.
or minus, but
Yeah.
around a year.
Yeah, that feels about right where we're at right now.
Chair, I do have two speakers still online.
Hold on. Is there any additional? Mary, go ahead. Sorry.
I think I'm ready now. I've done a lot of thinking since the last WRT meeting came out with the study, and I've lost a lot of sleep over this. And I wasn't going to speak tonight at all, but I have to say my piece. So I wrote a little speech at the last moment, and the more I think about it, I'm confident that Sonoma should not be included in the top 6 cities studied. This example should not be used as the building was never built. All the analysis WRT developed were very detailed, cannot be proven as the building was never built. Why use a non-existing building when you have a perfect recreation of the Santa Clara City Hall story? Sandusky, Ohio, should replace Sonoma. Sandusky, like Santa Clara, had their original city hall downtown. They moved their city hall out of downtown. We did the same 5 years later. Sandusky moved back downtown in 2017 into a restored historical building. Some of the arguments from our last meeting against Sandusky are irrelevant and illogical. Sandusky wasn't considered because it was too small. The population of Sonoma is under 50,000. Also, per Sandusky's city manager, they attract 2,000 over the weekends and summer due to their proximity to Cedar Point Amusement Park. This never used to happen until the downtown was revitalized. The second point is that there is a city that moved their city hall back. We need to take a look at the 100 million in private development that followed. If they realized this much, think of what a larger city can do. They restored an existing building versus building new. Sonoma didn't build at all. The city spent $30 million, which is more like 40 or 50 million today, to restore 3 buildings downtown, avoiding the negative environmental and historical effects of demolition and rebuilding. Sandusky must replace Sonoma. And I'd like to repeat that last sentence. I am going to fight for Sandusky to replace Sonoma in the study. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. All right, are there any additional?
I have two more hands, three more hands online.
I know Anna wants to go first.
Oh, sorry.
No, we'll do the public comment.
Yes, three more hands. Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. All right. So Jonathan, you can go ahead and unmute and speak.
Hello, audio working today?
Welcome,
Yes.
Jonathan. Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Jonathan Evans. I'm the president of the Old Quad Residents Association. Yeah, so I thought this was an interesting talk to learn a little bit about these sites. To really give some background on what the community is looking for, what we want to see in the downtown is really to have that activated retail space, you know, have restaurants and you know, shops and places to go to and things to do. And really the whole point of this entire downtown revitalization is really to give us those opportunities. And so a couple of questions on, you know, within the City Hall context is, you know, in these plans, is there an assumption that any sort of City Hall buildings built downtown could maintain, you know, like the first floor is entirely retail or provide, you know, restaurants? Because, you know, certainly, you know, I guess as a resident, I don't really want to generally, you know, don't want to walk over to City Hall to go to a meeting. I mean, I'm not there tonight. You know, not like, even though it's probably walking distance from my house, I don't think I'd necessarily walk over every night to go enjoy my, you know, city council meetings, as fun as they can be. And so really, I want to make sure the City Hall, you know, would, if it were to, you know, somebody were to build a downtown, really can provide all those. And then secondly, I kind of want to echo a little bit of what I think Butch Coyne said, and want to understand, like, what, you know, what is the trade-off or the option of just saying, you know, not moving City Hall? Like, you know, what is the opportunity cost there? You know, it's not obvious to me, at least, that, you know, City Hall in of itself, you know, really revitalizes a downtown area. And so just like to understand that sort of trade-off maybe a little better. And then finally, you know, I thought it was really interesting to hear about like the debt servicing, especially on those loans. I mean, to put it in perspective, we have a $27 million budget deficit this year. And, you know, the loan servicing on, you know, doing financing was like $20 million a year. And so like, that's our entire budget deficit. And I know there was some talk about, you know, staffing for the city being steady, but I do want to point out that between the beginning of COVID and now, the city has, you know, reduced a lot of budgets. As an example, library had to, you know, get rid of or lay off, you know, over 100 of their as-needed staff. I know they're not located in City Hall, but, you know, there are, you know, cuts all across the board, and, you know, we have a large budget deficit to take on, and, you know, I think it would be very hard pressed to see the community want to come out and support, you know, spending a lot of money on moving City Hall if the current building, you know, is meeting the city's needs. So we should really keep that in mind as we go through this process, that, you know, it's pretty expensive to do the move. So thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan.
All right, Donna, you should be able to unmute and speak.
Testing. Can you hear me?
Welcome, Donna. We can hear you.
Thank you, Adam. Going back to last meeting and looking at the other best practices, and to remind everyone, this country is thriving. USA is thriving. Silicon Valley and Santa Clara is the city of what's possible. We want, as residents, a place to go. The city is spending $350,000 on this study. We want to make sure we're getting accurate case studies to evaluate the conclusion of the study. I think if we go back to last meeting, we need to review this. Our group's criteria for the study was to understand the financial impact and value to the citizens of Santa Clara if City Hall was to be returned to downtown versus either rebuilt in its current location or moved to another part of Santa Clara. City Hall is over 50 years old. Our group has spent over 14 months identifying cities across the country who had either returned the City Hall back to the downtown or built a new City Hall to create that unique focal point for downtown. That's what residents want, is a focal point. Our volunteers have spoke to the city's leadership across the USA about the impact after City Hall was completed. On March 14th, 2023, WRT presented 6 cities to the Community Task Force. While Reclaiming Our Downtown agrees with 4 of these 6 cities, we are deeply concerned that the cities of Watsonville and Sonoma do not meet the criteria stated above, nor meet the spirit of the study. We're looking for a city hall to come to the residents as a focal point to use. You know, and I think if you look at the City Hall in Winter Garden and talk to the financial impact officer there, you'll see how City Hall has transformed city. It's not just city council meetings that we fall asleep in. City Hall is something that we can be proud of. And Sandusky is the other one. So can you please replace 2 of these best practices before you go further and study how today these downtowns are thriving with these city halls? Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. I believe there was one more. You said there were 3.
There's 3 more.
3 more. Okay.
Connie, you can go and ahead and unmute and speak. Connie, you can just unmute. Okay, I'll skip Connie for a minute and I'll go to Patricia. Patricia, you should be able to unmute and speak.
Thanks, Leslie, and thank you, Chair. I would try to keep my language clean, just for you guys. So I wasn't going to speak, but like Jonathan mentioned, like the debt servicing, that actually struck me as like a really interesting thing. I think if I remember correctly, the rent currently paid for SVP buildings are coming out of the SVP budget. So we're looking at putting more debt to service like on the city proper. So it's like it's kind of like different funding source. So I don't know if that was like apples to apples. I also had I'm actually a little bit confused by Skip's comment about are we really do we care about like what site we want to use, or does he only care about using the Commerce Plaza building for SVP and like not worry about like the rest of City Hall? And as my understanding is based on a previous meeting, is that there is capital work that needs to be done on a Commerce building, like if we were to keep that building. So that's also money that assuming SVP is going to have to spend. And also, of course, the RFP is out for the study. I think like working, I'm not sure about having a swap study areas is going to help. I think Sonoma is actually like a pretty close comparison to what we have and kind of going through the process. If I remember correctly, Sandusky actually takes up a lot more space than we do. And this is like a huge endeavor that we're looking at. I think also I want to thank the consultants because this is a very great presentation. It actually highlighted a lot of points that I pointed out before we started the study. And to be completely honest, like, you know, instead of spending this money, I like this is and would rather see more city services that we can provide to the citizen at this moment than to spend this money to kind of basically verify what I've said before. So, you know, something for the committee is like for the task force to think about. I'm not sure this is the best use of our time to kind of continue down this path. So thank you.
Thank you, Patricia.
Okay, I'm going to try Connie one more time. Connie, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak. Okay. She's not unmuting. I don't know.
Hi, can you hear me?
There we go. Hi, Connie.
Welcome, Connie.
Hey, hi. I've been listening. It's been so interesting. I'm glad I tuned in. But after listening to Rot's speakers tonight, I'm perplexed, and I'm wondering if you can maybe enlighten me. Sandusky was too small to include in the study, but you used the city of 50,000, which is also pretty small. The only difference is one did not build the city hall in their downtown, which is Sonoma, and the other, Sandusky, did with absolutely fantastic results. So I want to know, what is the real story behind choosing a city that failed to build a city hall? I don't understand. Personally, I smell a rat. Thank you.
Can I offer one just clarification? The case study that we used that people are calling Sonoma was actually Sonoma County. It was a study to relocate the civic center of the county. So it is a very large jurisdiction, and that project would have taken place in Santa Rosa, which is a comparably sized city to Santa Clara. Just to clarify that.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Connie. Are there any additional hands from the public before we
I have
close?
Skip's hand up again. I don't know if it's up from before or he put it up again. Hold on. Skip, did you have another comment or was your hand up from before?
I have another comment.
Okay, just so we just keep it brief, Skip. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't rattle on usually. I'll keep it brief. The main reason why we're, at least from my opinion, the main reason why everyone's considering moving City Hall is not just because it's 55 years old. It's not just because of space needed, more space needed. It's because City Hall is sitting on 10 acres. That's a total waste. City Hall shouldn't need more than 1.5 or 2 acres. Just one block of downtown or even 2/3 of downtown block. That's all City Hall needs. It doesn't need 10 acres. And plus the city owns another couple of acres on the other side of the Triton Museum. So all that land that could be used for affordable housing, and it's a perfect spot for affordable housing, should be used for affordable housing. And the city should, and the state has been encouraging all the cities to look for surplus land to build affordable housing. So that would be a great affordable housing site, and the city would make over 10 million an acre if they sold it to private developers for affordable housing. And so all this talk about lack of money, that's where your money comes from. That's where a big chunk of your money comes from. And furthermore, the city says, or WRT said they based the $350–400 million estimate based on what the city was suggesting. The county a civic center for San Mateo County is being built right now on a smaller block than downtown Santa Clara's blocks. And it's coming in, including parking, for under 150 million. And it's the same size, the same square footage. And it's a LEAP building, and it's got solar energy and all the other stuff.
Skip, can we wrap up, please?
You can end my talk.
No, I don't mind. You just wrap up.
No, go ahead and end my talk.
Thank you, Skip. Sorry, I did not mean to cut you off. I just.
Yes, you did.
All right, no more second rounds for community speakers. So, all right, we're going to close community comments. if there are no additional first-time hands. All right, go back to the task force. I think, Anna, you had some comments.
Yeah, it's more of a clarifying question. I was looking at, thinking about your chart, and the Central Green South and the Franklin ranked pretty well on the chart if we moved the City Hall to those particular blocks. Everything, because I'm a business person, so I'm interested in numbers. You mentioned displaced businesses as a result in choosing Central Green, South, and Franklin. So my question to the team, is it possible to put a value in dollars for lost revenues for those displaced small businesses? Our mom and pops, there are practically the only thriving commercial that we have right now, and it may be a while to build up our commercial center. If we, for the new downtown, especially in the A and B blocks. So my question to you, is it possible to do that? Honestly, our greatest opportunity to catalyze the commercial center, our downtown, will be not putting City Hall in A and B. So I agree with you on those numbers. But I'm interested if it's possible to get some revenues for those lost businesses if we move to those blocks. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I believe, Dan, you wanted to?
Yeah, actually, Skip hit on it. So I'm going to ask it a different way. In the WRT study, if City Hall moved out off of Warburton and the acreage became available, is that number calculated in the final estimate? So in other words, we can argue 10 million an acre, 5 or 7. It's a bunch of money. Is that calculated in?
I'll give a shot at that, and Victoria, you may want to add something. We haven't yet estimated the cost of these potential projects, only the potential funding and financing options.
Okay.
So land sale was one of those potential sources of funding and financing, but we haven't connected those sources with specific sites or projects yet. That would be the next step.
And just in addition, we recently lost somebody to the fact she can't afford to live here. So housing's near and dear to our group, and this is a residential City Hall. It's in a neighborhood, so it'd be a perfect place for housing and affordable housing.
And Mr. Chair, if I can add, just because I want to make sure,
Go ahead.
Kind of the consultant team here, the cost for building a new City Hall, that came from the previous study. I just want to clarify that. And the estimate that we had at the time was $1,750 a square foot. And I always just want to be clear that was all in costs, right? That included design, that included inspections, that included project management, and construction. So it's always good to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. The $1,750 a square foot, if you ask me today, I probably would say that's probably lower than where it needs to be based on kind of typical city costs and having to pay prevailing wage and everything else that's related to the city. We've seen numbers go a little higher, but we don't know yet. And then the last piece, because I know I've mentioned this before, there was no assumption of parking structures as part of that number. So that was for City Hall proper. We did look at some scenarios that included, I believe I apologize once again, just going off memory, in doing one layer of underground parking, and I think that raised the cost up to somewhere in the $450 million range for construction. So these are very broad numbers. I think they're just intended to give you perspective, but just to clarify that $350 million number that came from the previous study, it could be higher, it could be lower, but it's based on $1,750 a square foot with no structure parking. And like I said, we've seen those numbers trending higher, no lower, and it's an all-in cost, not just the construction bid.
Thank you, Manuel. So Peter, you were starting to talk about next steps. I'm just trying to understand before I make a couple comments, but so the next steps would be you take this feedback, make some adjustments to what you guys have already done, and then you start running a financial?
Well, the next step will be to sort of select a site that we want to study in more detail. And then I think study some options for that site, options that could take into account a full civic center move, or perhaps just a move of utilities, or just a move of City Hall, and perhaps a concept that would include public and private development, and study those in more detail, including financing costs and financing.
Right, and do that analysis across 4 sites in the downtown, just isn't possible, and therefore what we're asking tonight is to help
Select one.
narrow our focus on a preferred site so that we can move forward and address some of the questions that came up earlier.
So ultimately, though, going back to some of the concerns from the community on having Sonoma County studied versus Sandusky or in Watsonville or whatever, ultimately, those were just to show kind of at a high level, go, no go, does it make sense to even consider moving down City Hall downtown again, right? And that, what you guys actually provided was that it was kind of neutral. It showed that the office space and or the city use of City Hall in the same space would ultimately generate a similar result. Maybe not the same, but fairly close within the amount of unique visits and lunch runs and all that, if I remember correctly from the report last month. So being that we're already here, we see that the report kind of showed that there would be a, it's kind of in the middle. Ultimately, you still are proceeding with, doing your due diligence on what would be possible. You select the 4 sites, we would select one. I don't see going back to rehash to just say it's slightly better or slightly worse is really any kind of benefit. I think at this point, it's more beneficial for us to kind of really hone in on which of the 4 we want you to do a deeper dive into and come back with additional information. That's what I'm getting based on the whole conversation from this meeting and last meeting. Is that correct summary?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think one of the things that the case studies illustrated is that sometimes the City Hall is accompanied by a enormous sort of revitalization, such as in the case study in Massachusetts. And it's also a cautionary tale, which is that building a City Hall downtown doesn't necessarily translate to being a catalyst for redevelopment. There's just a lot of exogenous or a lot of factors that are that are in play outside of the City Hall itself. And I think that was one of the points of our selecting the sites that we did. The Sonoma site also had the advantage of actually having a really interesting narrative in terms of the evaluation process that they went through. And some of that is also the political context that went along with it. So it's not just the City Hall itself, but we also selected sites depending on the story of how they were of how this selection process took place.
Thanks. So I would ask this, the DCTF members to kind of start having a discussion about can we put the slide back up showing the 4 different locations of, which one makes the most sense for them to do the deeper dive into? That would be my recommendation. We've kind of been talking about the whole report in last month's presentation, but ultimately we need to kind of really hone in on which one we want to continue. Otherwise, whatever they produce is not going to make the precise plan if there's anything to even make. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. So I don't know if anybody wants to kick it off or you want me to start with my thoughts.
Thanks, Adam. And I want to just make one point as you get into it, that we can choose a hybrid. There could be, and we actually did test a sort of a hybrid that's sort of a blocks B and D hybrid, which we could show if you want, where there may be a best of both worlds scenario. So just keep that in mind.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Go ahead, Deborah.
Yeah, the reason I asked my question earlier about the near-term catalyst is because when we were talking in the other context, we were talking about which could get people into downtown the fastest. And we have been talking all along that that would be blocks A and B, because blocks C and D are owned by or occupied by the apartment complex, and it would take probably quite some time to relocate that office complex and break ground for a new development. So that's why I was a little bit confused about the definition of near-term catalyst, because I think from what we've been talking about that the option in the Arts Commons would be the most desirable for immediate results.
Right. So if we just took that one and scored it better, you know, it would, sorry, why is that not valuing? Huh. There we go.
Are you saying that though City Hall would delay the catalyst? Is that what you were getting at though?
No, not necessarily. I'm saying that because the city-owned property in blocks A and B are the most likely to be occupied first, that would be the catalyst to create the impression of a new downtown the fastest. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks. Anybody? Jan, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I mean, I think just from the numbers and just logistics, it looks like the Arts Commons, you know, based on the scoring by the team, has the most favorable sort of outcome. But it's also the blocks that are immediately across the street from the university. And I think if you want the students to go over there, they're not going to cross the street to go to a city hall. I mean, it's not something that would entice them. So this tags along on what Deborah was saying, which is like, if we want this downtown to work, and those two are the first blocks that we can actually build stuff on, while this, you know, whole analysis shows that those two blocks would be the best site out of these four, it may not be the best site for downtown to gain traction.
Oh, thank you, Jan. Go ahead, Dan, and then I'll.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree. I think, you know, blocks A and B are going to, you know, they're the most likely to be developed first. They're going to attract students. It's the place where music's going to be played, you know, because it's away from the houses. Our original idea was, I guess you're calling it Central Garden, I can't read. I gotta get new glasses. South. In that, you're gonna have a barbell otherwise for years. You're gonna have blocks A and B developed. You got Franklin Mall is gonna sit there with, you know, the Franklin Mall people. So you've got two strip malls. And City Hall might have been a way on Central Green South to pull City Hall out of this residential area, get the revenue and the housing here, put City Hall there, and connect your downtown. So, you know, that's where I'd go.
Thanks,
But
Dan.
I agree with Arts Common. I think that's got to be left alone.
Thank you, Dan. Butch, did you have something? Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure if you were trying to jump.
No, I would agree with Dan on that. If we have to pick a site, again, I'm not crazy about the idea, but if we had to pick a site, I would agree with you that that's the spot to be.
Yeah, so I guess I'll. Oh, I didn't know if you want to talk. Yeah, I don't think the Arts Common is the right spot. I mean, for multiple reasons. I actually think without the funding, there is no catalyst. So I actually think Franklin Mall should be the one we study. And the reason being is it's already all city-owned land. It's the most encumbered, meaning, you know, with the multiple ownership, so it'll probably be the longest holdout, since getting two people to agree on something is tough, getting 22 to agree on the same thing is even tougher, right? So, I mean, that would kind of be more mine, or Central South for sure, especially with the courthouse being potentially open. I mean, gives us a little bit more of an opportunity, but I would not use Art Commons. A and B has to be the draw from the university because we're going to need their money.
Well, and last on South.
I mean, it's true.
It's true. So on South, you've got an 11-story building sitting right across the street from you. So Skip did have a good point on acreage. You're going up?
Yeah,
You know,
I don't know, I mean, I think.
that'd
really-
be the place where you go up.
I think you. I'm sorry. I think realistically, you should probably condense it into a single square block, so you have 9,000 square feet
And
roughly.
it's facing Homestead. It's not it's not impacting retail. Again, I was against City Hall. I got talked into it. Sandusky keeps coming up. That's what talked me into it. Yeah. You got 40,000 people and, oh, I'm sorry. You had 40,000 people and 150 million in investment that followed on within 4 years. So again, private investment that brought retail.
So South?
That's mine.
South?
How many south?
South? No, we just get a consensus.
Oh, yeah, we can't vote.
Oh, whatever. I think everybody's for South, yeah. Any objections to South? All right, South, please. All right, well, I think that, is there any additional discussion? I think that's all you needed, right, Peter? Is there any additional direction?
I think that's good. Is that a good process? Was everyone, it's a little hard to tell from here. So I don't know if you want to take a formal vote or what, but.
It would be helpful to formalize it, honestly, to make sure that we're clear on it also.
We can't vote though, right?
Well, we're not a voting body, but it's all right. All in favor
yeah.
of, what is it, Central Green South, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. There you have it.
Wow.
Can I?
This is very efficient.
After my whole speech about not
I
getting
love
two
that.
people to agree.
I love that. Can I complicate it for a moment? And that is,
I gave you that option before we voted.
okay. Could we look at, and Matt, maybe you want to show our hybrid, our back pocket scheme? Because I was wondering
No,
earlier.
we want it on one block, Peter. We want it on block, realistically, it's the courthouse block. So what's that, C? E?
Okay.
D.
Peter, I'm not
E?
insulting you, but I'll be right back.
All right.
No, if you want to show the drawing, you can, but I really think it just needs to be on the south, and it's going to be the D block. You're not going to get the second block from Swenson.
Okay, so the concept here is that we would just be on D for City Hall, but we'd also be able to make use of the existing Commerce Plaza office building for utilities. So there would be some benefit there. And you'd have a good adjacency on Homestead, and potentially that garage is nicely located there between them.
No, I think the consensus was that any use of the Art Commons would deteriorate the catalyst and the draw for the actual downtown, putting a civic building on the edge. So I think that's, it's fairly well determined that we want it off the A and B. So not hybrid. South, green south.
Oops. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
Just to clarify, we're doing it at one block, right?
So let's just look at it a little bit more.
Yes.
Did I understand right that did somebody say
D.
maybe look at putting the whole thing on block D?
D.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's,
And is that consensus? Because that's actually very helpful guidance. Well, it's all
Yep,
helpful
and-
guidance,
and
but that's
Dan-
especially so.
Dan said yes.
Dan said yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, that really helps us get focused.
Yeah, that's
Held
great.
it.
Yeah, that's great. That's very easy.
All right. Well, thank you all for your time and the report and all the detail. We do really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing the next step of the process.
Yeah. Look forward to seeing you soon.
All right. Well, thank you all.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Yep. Good night.
All right. I believe we'll take a 5-minute break for everybody, a little bio break. We'll meet back up here at 8:40. We'll go like 8:45. I'll give 8:45. I know. There might be a line.
For our audience, a 10-minute break that's online, so they know. Okay, thank you.
Wait till, gotta wait till the screen comes back. Oh, we're good? All right, well, welcome back, everybody. Item number 3 is going to be continued to the next DCTF meeting. Member Varshney was not able to make it today, so we're going to continue it. So we're going to move on to item number 4, which is, you want me to read it or review? Review of the standard section 6.3.k architecturally significant historical sites in the downtown form-based code.
Okay, so I did a short staff report on this one, and in the staff report, I put the section that's currently in the form-based code around architecturally significant historical sites. And then, based on DCTF discussion, I included 2 sections of our current historic combining district, zoning district, that I thought would apply to what the DCTF was trying to get at preserving historical structures within the downtown area. And that's the architectural control for structures as well as the demolition restriction. And I'm just open to your comments and discussion.
I had a question.
Go ahead, Anna.
Hi, Leslie. I was wondering, for the master plan, we had referenced the standards throughout the master plan. Just by putting a link in that took them right back to the city, would it be more efficient rather than just singling out 2 paragraphs, just doing the same thing and putting that link in? Because all of these sections are applicable to our.
So they're sort of applicable. For the HT district, the owner actually has to enter into an agreement with the city. So that's where it's a little different. So I left those parts out. And I could take another look and see if maybe there's a couple more parts. The downtown precise plan and the form-based code already have use regulations. They already talk about, allowing commercial uses in residential properties, and vice versa. But I can take a second look. But HT is very specific to, and there's a contract that the property owner enters into, which is why I left that out, because it would be a very different process.
And that would be the post office that you're referring to?
So there's...
Unless there's a buyer and they sell it.
Yeah, there's three structures. So the post office isn't currently formally designated, but we do have a map in the precise plan and in the zoning district, the form-based code, that shows the sites that we feel are historically significant, and it calls out the post office. If we put this language in the form-based code and it references that map, it would then reference to the post office.
I've always thought more is better.
Yeah.
May I ask, and forgive me, I didn't see this, are the 2 homes on Homestead and Monroe covered?
So one of them is currently HT. Yeah. They're both on the historic resources inventory, though.
Butch's is identified as historically significant, and is that on the Mills Act, Butch's? Just one, so Butch's is not, so Coles is, so red, no, Butch. Yeah.
I thought you were in land speculation.
All right. So it sounds like the Historical Landmarks Commission is working on designating the post office HT, and they're going through the DPR process, and they're moving along. So if and when that does, and I would assume that it will end up getting designated at some point, then that would supersede the plan? Because we've identified it as potentially, but then they do it and get it actually designated HT and marked as historically significant, and then that would be, I'm just wondering how.
Yeah, I don't know that they're designating it HT. They are doing the analysis so that it could be designated on the historic resources inventory, which is in our general plan.
So what does that mean? What?
We want it
Because
to
I've
be
seen,
an asset.
well, and the reason I say that, it's kind of, I've seen things that are on the historic resource that get demolished. So
there's a
I don't really
process,
feel
though.
like that is a barrier.
Right.
And
If you do it right, there is a process in our code, if you're on the HRI, for additional permitting that's required if you want to modify your structure.
I just haven't seen it be upheld well, and I've seen demolition by neglect in the past where And the post office I can absolutely see is demolition by neglect. It just sits there and rots into oblivion, and then finally the federal government decides to do something with it, and it is what it's already far gone, so. All right. I don't know what to say because I don't know what else to do or how to protect it better.
Well, I mean, are you saying that, is it falling into neglect in your opinion right now?
I can tell you there's a lot of deferred maintenance on the building. I mean, I just went in there the other day to drop some stuff off. They haven't remodeled it in a very long time.
What about the roof?
I haven't been up there. I have no idea. I mean, just from the interior, I mean, there's a lot of just deferred maintenance, which then adds into compounding big maintenance. Because, you know, as paint starts to go, water starts to get in, dry rot starts to fester, termites start to climb, onward and upward. Soon there's just dust.
Perhaps
Anyway.
there's a concern over public safety that they wouldn't allow that to happen as a post office. That's something we can explore.
How would you go about getting the post office designated historical, HT?
So we're going to start by doing the analysis, and then we're consulting with our city attorney on the best way to move forward and actually getting it designated. The way the city process currently works is that the property owner has to agree to designate it on the inventory. And that's specifically because that's how our code is laid out.
Okay, that's fine. We can get them to agree. That's the easy part.
All right.
All right. So I guess if you could just keep us posted, I'm sure the HLC will keep us posted as well. So, all right. Thank you. Are there any, we should go to the public, or is there any other members of the task force that like to speak before we go to the public? I don't see anybody. All right. Are there any public comments on this? Please raise your hand.
I can't see it while I'm sharing. Hold on. Okay, I have one hand. All right. Patricia, you should be able to unmute and speak.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Chair. Just to give you a little bit of color on the post office, I actually had spoke with our honorary city historian, Lori Garcia, about this. She actually did a bunch of research at the National Archives on it. The building itself, in short, is National Registry eligible. It is actually designed by an architect from the Treasury Department, which was very rare. He usually did like a lot of really big, huge buildings, and somehow he ended up designing this particular building. So that is very significant in architectural. If you actually, when you go in there, look up, there's some reliefs carved in there. They're actually from a WPA program for a New Deal. So those are also, those are actually owned by basically the public. So there's a ton of stuff around that specific building that makes it very, very historically significant, and we will do whatever we can to get the right designation for it to keep it protected. So that's why I kind of give you that color. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Gives me a lot of confidence that you're leading the charge. I appreciate it. All right, if there's no additional public comments, we'll go back to the members of the DCTF and close the item out. So are there any additional comments? All right. Thank you, Leslie, pulling that together. So now we'll move on to public presentation. So is there anyone in the community that would like to present on anything that was not on tonight's agenda? Please raise your hand or step forward.
I see no hands.
Okay, we're going to move on. Leslie, can we get an update? Or I guess staff report.
Yes, so I have two items for you.
I went
The
into the
first
schedule.
item is the task force that is here in person. I did hand to you a printed document along with your agenda this evening that has responses from our consultant on your questions on the form-based code. So I pulled out from your discussion all the questions and clarifications that the DCTF requested. So you can go ahead and read that. Let me know if you have any questions or if you want to discuss any of these items more in depth at the next DCTF meeting. I'll put that on the agenda for you. I did also give the consultant a marked up code document with the other changes that we had talked about. So these are the ones that you wanted clarified or additional information, so you can decide if anything needs to be changed with these items as well.
Thank you. So I guess if the DCTF members can let Leslie or myself know by, what, 2 weeks from now?
Yeah, at least
So
a
we-
week before our next meeting.
Yeah, I would say let's try to let her know 2 weeks from now, or me as well, if we want to put this on the agenda, or if we want to just, if there's any responses that you want to just email a response to, maybe, we can just give feedback that way, so we
Yeah,
don't
absolutely.
screw up another meeting, so. And we'll see how many comments we get. If we get a bunch, maybe we'll have it on the agenda. If we only get one or two, then maybe we'll just send them in.
That sounds good, thank you.
Works for everybody? Work? Okay.
Okay, and the second item I have, I'll just share my screen really quick, is just a short update, and Manuel already mentioned this at the beginning of the meeting on the schedule. We're looking to circulate our environmental document in May, which means Planning Commission, City Council study sessions, July, August, Planning Commission, City Council, August, September timeframes. So yeah, there you go.
Great, thank you, Leslie. And is there any risk of not sending it out in May? And do you have a date in May?
Boy, I hope not.
Do you have a date in May?
I don't have a date in May, otherwise I would have put one on there, but yes.
I always ask for dates.
I'd love to put a date.
Okay. Remember, Memorial Day is at the end, Memorial Weekend, so it's a holiday.
That's right, but it'll have to account in our 45 days.
All right. If we're going to move on from that, thank you, Leslie. And I guess is there a motion to adjourn the DCTF meeting of April 20th, 2023?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor in adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say no. All right, thank you all. Have a great evening.
Was this 37 or 8?
I think it's 38. I was going to say.
38.